Hey, welcome to the channel. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about ggplot2 data visualization and creating custom themes that you can apply to your charts. The prerequisites for this are, I'm assuming you have R installed, you have RStudio installed, and perhaps Quarto as well. If you want to know more about Quarto and the publishing system, check that out on my other videos. But these things that I'm going to show you today will work in a regular R script as well. So the goal here is to create some simple data and then visualize that with ggplot2 in a few different ways by using regular built-in themes and then some customized versions of those themes. So let's go ahead and look here at the libraries that I'm using today. The first one is Tibble, and I'm using that for data organization. TidyR is used for data management, rearrangement. The idea here I'll talk about later is that we put the data into a format that's suitable for plotting. dplyr is used for manipulation. ggplot2 is used for visualization. And then lastly, grid extra is used for arrangement of some plots. And I'm doing that more for instructional purposes, but you may use it for reports. Now, the code is in this document able to be folded up. So throughout, I'll be clicking these reveal buttons to show and hide the code. I have it expanded already by default. So when we get done with these, I'll just fold these up and get them out of the way. So here we just load our libraries. These are the same ones I just mentioned. That's really straightforward. As far as the data and setup, I'm creating some really simple examples here. So this is just a really simple data set. So I'll walk you through that. So first I'm creating a vector of ID numbers. Really, it's just the word site with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the bottom of it. And I create 1 through 50 for that. And I'm storing that in this variable site. So then I'm creating 3 vectors of 50 numeric values. And these are just sampled from the uniform distribution. And I change the min and the max of these so that the values come out a little bit different from each other. So once I have all that created, I just push it into a Tibble, and then I call it T for Tibble. And so we have site, species 1, 2, 3, and then we can display this data frame. And we see it here. So the nice thing about Tibbles, again, they show you what your vectors inside are. So here we have a character vector, we have doubles for the rest of these, and you can see some of the values. So what we want to do next is to make sure that our data are tidied up. So before we pass this to ggplot2, I'm going to do a little bit of a rearrangement here so that every column is a variable, every row is an observation, and every cell is a single value. So we're going to essentially take this wide data frame and adjust it so it's a longer data frame. And the way that you do that is using the tidyr library. We're going to call this pivot longer function. So we're using this pipe notation, which I've explained in other videos, but that allows you to string together commands. Here we just have our original Tibble, and then we are applying this pivot longer function to it. And inside we can ignore the site variable, and then we are taking the other 2 columns. I'll just scroll back up here, or other 3 columns. We're taking those and we're sort of rotating that so that each one of these species column names becomes a data point, and we're going to call those species. And then below that, we have all the values being shoved into a column called measurement. So when this is complete, we'll have 3 columns instead. And so we have site, which we left alone, and then we have species for our 3 different species, and then our measurements that correspond to each one of our individuals in the data set. So one thing to notice, this has many, many more rows than we had originally, but that's again because we took the species data and sort of squished it into one column. Now, with that said, we are ready to go forward with our visualizations. Now, we can do quite a few things with this little data set, but one easy thing that we can do first, I'm just calling this case 1, is to look at the averages of the measurements for each species. So here we are creating a summary table containing the measurement averages by species. And you may note that dplyr, which I'm using here, has some SQL-like functions. So if you're used to using SQL or SQL if you prefer, then you may notice that some of these things that we're trying to do here remind you of that. So first, I'm creating a new table just called tmeans, and then I'm taking the tidy version, the longer version of our data set, and then we're using group by to group the species, and then we're going to summarize at the variable's measurement. Now it's just one here, but we're summarizing on measurement, and then we are getting the mean of those values. So you can think about grouping all of the values for species 1, then we're getting the mean of that, and we're repeating that for species 2 and 3. And in here, you'll see the word average. That first word out of these two in this inside this parentheses group here is the title for the column. So I chose average because it's different than mean. Otherwise, it would say mean equals mean. And so we'll take a look down below to see what we do with that. So to create a chart with ggplot, we can call ggplot and then tell it which data set we want. In this case, we want the tmeans data set, which is really small. It just has an average for each of the 3 species. And then we have this aesthetics setup where X is the species and Y is the average. So those are the 2 columns out of that data set. And then we use geom_bar and stat equals identity to just give us a normal bar chart. And then we do a little bit extra by adding a title and subtitle to the chart. And then I'm applying the built-in theme called theme dark. And that gives us this chart below. We can see our title, subtitle, and then all of our access labels. And then the chart itself is relatively dark, as you might suspect, and not necessarily something you would want to publish. It's difficult to read, but this is an available option. And if you want to, you can go in and make additional changes, but this is just the default setting that you would get. Now, case 2, let's say we wanted to make some box plots. So for every one of our species, we had something like 50 measurements. And you might be interested in the distribution of those measurements. Now, we already know that they were all drawn from a uniform distribution. So again, this is just for demo purposes. But what if you wanted to see that side by side? So we're going to use ggplot to create geom_box_plot, which will give us 3 box plots. And we don't have to do much to the data. It's set up the same way. So X is species and Y is measurement, same as before. And so in this case, we don't use the means data set. We go back to our tidy data set. But this is the output. It's not bad. It's readable, but it has a little bit extra going on with grid lines and some things. This is the theme minimal theme. And as you might suspect, it's pretty lightweight. There's not any color. There's not anything that's really hard to read. And it works generally relatively well. It could be cleaned up a bit, but it's not terrible on its own. And I use it quite a bit for stuff, but I usually add a little extra work to polish it a little further. So when we do our custom themes, we will start with the minimal theme shown here and then build on that to make it a little different. And I'll show you a bad example and a good example so you get a little extra practice. So let's take a look at a custom theme that is kind of ugly. And what you can do is set up a function in R. So we're going to call this function theme bad. And then you can see the command here for a function. And then we essentially stack in all of our decisions. So we can do some work with the fonts. I will set up 2 fonts. So font 1 is mono and font 2 is sans. On Windows, you have serif, sans, or mono. So I'm choosing 2 of those. And then I'm setting up a few different color choices. So these are all using hexadecimal notation. If you're not familiar with that, it's used commonly for color online. And we're calling these call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So once we have some colors and some font choices set up as variables, we can plug that in later. So that's really just sort of set up so we can make everything easier to read later. And then we are adding this command here for theme minimal, which is what we want to start with. And then there's a little bit of code here saying that we want to replace some elements of that. So theme minimal already has design choices packed into it. So a bit of that is okay, and some other things are going to be changed. So this is our canvas that we start painting. Now below we have theme, and the background color, background grid lines, axis text, and title and caption text are all going to be adjusted. So the panel background is simply the background of the plot, and it's essentially a rectangle. So we have some options to change the fill color, the border line width, and the border line type. So I'm changing that to color 2, color 5, a line width of 3, and a solid line. There's some other options in here you can play with, and line type can be something like dashed or dotted as well, or you can use numbers 1, 2, 3 and play with that. If you want, look up the documentation around it and have at it. I encourage you to play with this. Now, the background grid lines, we're using this element line function, and similarly, we can change color, line width, and line type there. The axis text is the element text function, and you can change the family, the face, the color, the size, the angle of it, and more. So over here, I also have a few edits to margins, and that's just to shift the text around a little bit on those axes. So I'll scroll back over here. Down below, we have title, subtitle, and caption. So these are commonly used on your plot to explain things a bit more, give a little more information. And so that would be a nice thing to change and standardize. So here we just have the font family as the second one, which is Sans, which is a sans serif font. And then we set the size, the face, which can be plain, italic, or bold. And then we see some horizontal and vertical adjustments or justifications. So below that, well, let me say that completes the complete theme here. So we just close it out with these brackets. And the other theme here is theme good. So by comparison, this one is intended to be a nicer look. It's more minimalistic. I tried to make better design choices, and this one would be a bit more of a professional look than the bad one, which we'll see momentarily. And so I tried to leave the setup almost exactly the same for a good side-by-side comparison. But the colors are, instead of the colors that you'll see in a moment, these are white, black, and then sort of a light and a dark gray. And then I have one color that we could use for a little bit of a punch if we wanted something to stand out. But in general, you don't need color in your non-data elements. Sometimes you do want color in your data elements to make something pop, but I'm trying to keep this very simple, monochromatic, and easy to read. So down below, I've already talked about these, but these are mostly the same as before. So to apply these, in general, when you create your plot with a ggplot command, you can store that as a new variable. So commonly you'll see in code that you read online, you'll see ggplots stored as the letter P for plot. So if you take your plot and store it as P, then you can adapt that with the theme after the fact. So even though we've already created these plots and stored them with the theme minimal and the theme dark, as you see here, what we can do is adjust these. So just to recap, we created a plot called plot box plots and then stored in that name the ggplot with the theme minimal. That's okay. We're going to update that. So down below, after we created all of our themes, we're going to apply these. So first thing we can do is, for ease of use and display, restore each of our plots. So I'm calling plot bar chart P1A, and plot box plots P2A. So those are our first and second plots. And then for one variant of those, I'm just creating a version where I add the theme bad, and then another where I add the theme good. So for the bar chart, which is chart 1, we have P1A, which is normal, 1B, which is bad, and 1C, which is good, and then we do the same thing for the box plots. And then using that grid extra library, I can arrange all of those, and then in here you'll just notice all the names of the plots, and then the number of columns is set to 3. So that will give us a 3-column and 2-row grid of those charts. So that makes it really easy to do some layouts. And below here, you can see what they look like. So in the first column, we see the originals that we saw earlier. So the dark theme and the minimal theme. In the middle, we see the results of our bad design choices. And, it may look kind of cool for colors, but it's not really easy to read, so it doesn't work well for data visualization. And besides, these bars are really dark for that background. So anyway, it's hard to read, but it shows you that you can customize all of these elements in different ways. And then in the third column, we see a better example. It's a little bit lighter weight. I got rid of some background clutter, and I changed a few things like these axis labels for species are a little bit lighter than the axis title, and the same thing on the y-axis. So there's some very subtle but important visual choices that were made to make this a little bit easier to read. So I hope you enjoyed that, and good luck setting up your own ggplot2 custom themes. Thanks. Have a great day, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.